What is up, Ammu-Nation? So I had actually another video planned, but it's taking a bit too long and I kind of wanted to work on it a little bit more, so I'm just going to yap to you about the Holy Roman Empire. Near the end of the Roman Empire, it was split into the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire ended up falling very quickly in 476 AD, and the Eastern Roman Empire, scrambling, ended up conquering back most of Italy. However, being so far from the capital in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, meant that the Eastern Roman Empire's hold over Italy was very tenuous. On the other side of Europe, in modern-day France, the Franks were consolidating their hold over the area. Charlemagne, one of the most successful of the Frankish kings, took all of France, most of Germany, and a lot of northern Italy. This connected the Frankish lands with the lands owned by the Pope. The Pope was kind of pissed at the Eastern Roman Empire, firstly because they hadn't really been protecting them very well, but also because a Roman emperor, whose father died early, so he was still a child, was removed from the throne by his mother. And back in the day, a queen as an emperor, that's not going to fly. So the Pope, thankful to Charlemagne for defending him, gave him the title of Roman Emperor. After Charlemagne died, his empire was split into many pieces, and the title of Roman Emperor was claimed by the different inheritors to the empire. This was until one of the descendants, Otto, who was leader of the eastern part of the empire, came back and conquered a lot of Italy. This again was looked favourably on by the Pope, who crowned Otto as the emperor, and therefore the German kings as the successors to the empire. Eventually, one of his descendants died without an heir, and the dukes and nobles among the empire elected a new emperor. This was the basis of something a bit strange about the Holy Roman Empire, which was that it was an elective monarchy, which seems counterintuitive. How could you have a monarchy where you elect them? This was properly formalized in the 13th century, but what would happen is the ruler of certain nations would get the privilege of electing the new emperor once an emperor died. Once they were elected, they ruled for their whole life, but the next emperor had to be elected again. When an emperor was elected, the Pope would crown them as Emperor of the Romans. The thing is, back then, the concept of a nation-state wasn't really a thing. It was more that people owned land and then you maybe had the right to collect taxes from those people. But it's not an emperor in the way that we would consider a dictator today. There weren't really the Holy Roman Emperor laws or a Holy Roman Empire army yet. It was more a collection of duchies that kind of agreed that the emperor had authority, quote unquote. In fact, one of the most famous Roman emperors, Friedrich Barbarossa, spent most of his time battling with Italians to justify his authority independent of the Pope. He did all of this before making peace with the Pope and then dying in a crusade. Speaking of crusades, a lot of the expansion of the empire in this time was Germans going east towards the areas of modern-day Poland. They Germanized and Christianized the lands, one of the most famous of which is the Teutonic Knights being invited to another area of modern-day Poland that I will get back to later. A dynasty of Holy Roman emperors that you may have heard of are the Habsburgs. I feel like the only thing people know about the Habsburgs is that they did incest. And that's true, but they were also OP as hell. There was an emperor called Maximilian, and he married a ruler of Burgundy, and they just got their lands. They just have Burgundy now. Then some guy in Spain dies, and then they just have Spain. To be fair, he did have to end up splitting it between his sons, but still, man, that's a fucked up amount of land to just, you just get it now. Okay, something else going on around the time of the 1500s was a guy called Martin Luther, and he basically went, fuck the Pope, I hate the Pope, all my homies hate the Pope, and then he basically started, one of the biggest, religious conflicts in, history. And as I discussed before, the Holy Roman Empire wasn't really a single nation state, it was more like a collection of different nobles and different lords. This meant that when different lords converted to different sects of Christianity, they had much more power to not immediately get murdered for heresy. This eventually culminated in the 30 Years' War, which was one of the most destructive conflicts in all of European history, with about 4 to 8 million people dying in the 1600s. It was basically a huge civil war that ended up bringing in France, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, and the Netherlands. After the war, the Habsburg emperors had to accept that Protestantism was chill, along with a lot of different territorial concessions. Some of these territorial expansions went to Brandenburg, Prussia. That's right, the Teutonic Knights from earlier, their leader died, and their land was inherited by Brandenburg, one of the Elector states, and our Protestant kingdom that was growing rapidly. This was very unusual in the Holy Roman Empire. Generally, the biggest nation was always Austria, which led to a lot of their rulers becoming emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. In 1713, Frederick William, otherwise known as Frederick the Great, ascended to the Prussian throne. Frederick the Great is known as one of the best military leaders in history due to his many military victories over his life, and specifically the conquest of Silesia. He reorganized several aspects of the state, including the army, civil service, and judicial system. He was a big fan of the arts and almost definitely gay. How base can one man get? Anyway, the rivalry between Prussia and Austria defined a lot of the developments in Holy Roman Empire history after the 1700s, each vying for influence over the smaller states, and eventually, after dissolution of the empire, each vying for economic control. I hear you crying out, Nico, I don't see any Holy Roman Empire here today. So how did the empire fall? Well, it was all down to one man. You know him, you love him. It was Napoleon. He reorganized a lot of the smaller German states into one big confederation of the Rhine, which was loyal to France. And so the Austrian emperor at the time decided that there was no more need for the Holy Roman Empire, and so he dissolved it. Eventually, Prussia, with ideas of German nationalism, would eventually unite the German people, and Austria dissolved after World War I. And yeah, that's about it. My sources are Wikipedia and EU4. Thank you for listening.